Today on Fortnite, I got second place. I was so close.
Mom, will you get me a snack?
Mom! It's time for adult conversation. With me, your host, Brandy Ferner. Hello, Adult Conversation podcast listeners. Today's episode drops lots of truth, even if it's a little uncomfortable to hear. Today's guest, Zawn, is an outspoken writer and feminist who takes no prisoners with gender inequality bullshit in marriage and parenting. She has a fascinating backstory that explains how she got her point of view, and so early, and she's helping moms to demand better for themselves even before they're married or choose to become mothers. In this episode, Zawn and I discuss the things she heard in a mom's group that shocked her, the kind of man who cannot be fixed, an equitable solution that isn't just leaving your marriage, and innovative ideas that sort of blew my mind about what we do about these inequalities for ourselves and also our children. On to the show. Today on the podcast, I'm talking with someone who I think can get even more heated than me about the patriarchal lie that is self-care, among other things. So today's guest, Zawn Villines, is an outspoken writer who's whip-smart and also sick of men's shit. In addition to her background in writing about politics and medicine, she writes about motherhood, marriage, and household inequality. In many of my social circles, I tend to be one of the loudest voices in gender equality in parenting, but Zawn, I feel like, is even louder than me, and I love her for it. Whenever I see a new article or post by her, I'm always like, oh, what am I going to learn today? So I asked her here to help educate and validate us. So welcome to the podcast, Zawn.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to talk to you, and I'm so happy to speak to you voice to voice. You know, I hear your voice in your writing, but I always enjoy putting something more personal to an online name. So this is sort of exciting that now I know the voice that goes along with you. And so we have a lot to get into and possibly rage about with each other, and also some action steps. So this isn't just going to be anger and pointing out injustices. But before we get to that, Zawn, what do the listeners need to know about you?
Sure. So like you said, I'm a writer. I've been a writer my whole career. Most of what I've written has, in spite of being raised a feminist and being a lifelong feminist, been pretty apolitical. I mostly do medical writing. So I was not really that familiar with the world of feminism and motherhood until I had a child. And then I started joining all of these mom groups. And it was like the same question over and over again, which basically boils down to, I just had a baby and my husband needs me to cook dinner and he needs to go play golf and I need to clean the house, or it's Mother's Day and my husband didn't do anything, but he went out with his boys. And I was just like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is actually happening?
Yes.
So I sort of came to this awareness of household inequality as someone who did not experience that and who was just stunned by it. And so I just started writing about it and saying exactly what I felt about it. And I thought that I was going to get a lot of backlash, but instead what I found is that women are really mad. And most of the criticism I get from women is actually for not being radical enough.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Who are these women? I need to know them. I need to be connected with these women who are like even more extreme than me and you.
Right?
Holy shit.
Right? It's wild.
This exists.
I'll be like, divorce him. And they'll be like, no, poison him. Light him on fire. And these are, seemingly normal seeming women.
Oh my gosh. There's so much there.
I'm also kind of like a birth justice advocate. And I have this like nonprofit where we basically educate women about their legal rights in childbirth. And I know that seems a bit disconnected from household labor, but I've actually found that there's a really close connection. And there's this horrifying phenomenon of men just being shit when their partners have babies. And I don't have any data on this point, but what I do observe is that the less likely a man is to contribute to household labor, the less likely he is to be a good support person when his partner has a baby. And that initiates a whole cascade of things, of birth trauma and postpartum depression. So I feel like these two things are connected. And I've been sort of struggling to find a way to connect them more publicly. But what I'm finding is that even among like very conservative women who would never dare to call themselves feminists, when I post on my nonprofit page about lazy men, they're like, fuck yeah, kill them all. Like, so this is across demographics. And I think that's important to emphasize.
Yes. Well, and I was a birth doula for 10 years, and I taught childbirth education, and I worked in birth trauma counseling. So exactly what you're talking about is so, so real. And to be honest with you, the reason I got out of birth work was because I would be a part of these people's like most amazing day, and I was trauma informed, and I felt like I could offer so much. And I would just see all of the things that you're talking about just play out in birth and then after birth. And it became really hard to watch this family be born and then watch the woman. Like, I'm like, oh, what kind of autoimmune disease is she going to have in 5 years?
Yes.
Because she's been working herself ragged. And it was like fatigue for me as a care provider because I knew that's what was coming. And I could see the dynamics in the birth room. So you are absolutely spot on about how those are connected.
Yeah, it's really, it's so upsetting to see women at this like really vulnerable period, rather than having their partners being like, yeah, you did it and you're awesome. Be like, get in the fucking kitchen and make me some dinner. It's just awful.
And it's hard too, because it's kind of like what you were saying is that you didn't know the intersection of feminism and motherhood until you became a mother yourself. But like we pick our partners before we get to this stage in many cases. And so I think this is the first time for many women where they realize and they really see, oh my gosh, my partner who, maybe I thought he was a little bit lazy or whatever, but now I'm seeing that this is a problem. So then you've got a woman becoming a mother and all the heaviness of that and then birth and everything. But then on top of it, you've got her going, oh shit, did I pick wrong?
Yeah.
Did I pick the wrong partner? And how does this play out? And also maybe, of course, she may love her partner, but then it's like, so now do I have to educate him about this? So do I have to undo these things in him? So it's like basically caretaking everyone in the picture.
Exactly.
I'm exhausted thinking about it.
It's awful.
I wanted to go back and ask you, okay, so lifelong feminist. So how did you grow up that you're a lifelong feminist? What was that like? And how were your parents? What was the setup?
I come from a long line of activists. All four of my grandparents were activists in different ways. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom for the first couple of years of my life, but she didn't do a whole lot of staying at home. She was on all of these boards. There was always like a protest or a cause or a congressperson she was threatening. And my dad is a lawyer and lobbyist who like loved this about her. So they would often tag team people where one of them would play like the rational one and the other one would be like, my spouse is fucking crazy. Like you got to do what they want. It was really amazing. So they divorced when I was 10, but they still remained best friends and continued to work on various causes together. My mom's big thing was child advocacy. So she did like a lot of child abuse prevention. But what was really interesting is she was an early advocate of family reunification, not putting kids in the foster care system, not, reflexively saying because a mother is poor, she should give up her baby for adoption.
Yeah.
So, I got an early introduction to that and was very committed to the feminism and family stuff. But the lens through which I saw things was like a socioeconomic lens.
Wow.
I didn't really ever consider the like feminism and family stuff for upper middle class white women because that's just not what I was seeing. My parents did a pretty good job splitting things. And then after they divorced, they had joint custody. And so like my dad did all the stuff my mom did. I remember him being very like dismissive of uninvolved dads. He had this line that he would often say that like real dads don't golf and like real dads learn how to do the French braid correctly. So that was like very much my model. And like it, it wasn't perfect. I mean, there's always, especially a generation ago, some inequality.
Right.
But I was very keenly aware that I wanted that in my own relationship. So when I looked for partners, like our first date, I'd be like, tell me about if you're a feminist and why. And if I got any pushback, I'd just be like, this is not gonna work.
Wow. So you were one of the few people who knew from the beginning the right questions to ask. You knew to ask the questions that like 30 to 40-year-old you would want answered.
Yeah.
At 20 or, at 20 or somewhere in your 20s.
Yeah. I mean, my parents and my grandparents all did a lot of talking about what makes a good relationship, what makes a good life. My grandmother in particular, my grandparents were married for like 50 plus years, very happily. And so I kind of like had that model of like, I want what they have. So, we talked a lot about like how you get what they have. So I went into this with like a lot of advantages that I think a lot of other women don't, of having had adults talk to me about, what to expect from a partner. And also seeing from the adults in my life what I didn't like with how they were with partners. And I think that a lot of women like only come to that much later in life. And when they do come to it, the cultural message is just like, well, that's how men are. You just have to, it's just a little thing. And it's not a little thing.
Yes. But you give me hope because I think it's so important, the recognizing that you had this advantage that a lot of people don't. But hopefully those of us in these generations who are raising our sons and daughters and anything in between to be more cognizant of that and to be more feminist, that our kids will be like you. Because they will grow up in that, and then they will know the questions to ask, and they'll know, like, because they'll have family members who talk about what makes a good relationship. So you, I feel like, are the product of what a lot of us of this parenting generation are trying to produce. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's important for people to hear that it doesn't have to be perfect. What you model to your kids does matter. If your relationship is unequal, that's going to be what feels normal to them. But if you're openly talking to them about things and there are some like problems that they're witnessing, they'll get the critical thinking skills that they need. My parents divorced, so like obviously their relationship wasn't perfect.
Sure.
But they had, talked to me enough and modeled to me enough good stuff that I was able to not normalize the bad stuff.
I love that, the good enough. And maybe the most important stuff was the stuff that was modeled.
Right. And it was partnership. I mean, that's the real thing. My mom died 2 months ago, and my parents were partners until the very end. My dad, did her eulogy, even though they've been divorced now longer than they were married. They were working together on legislation, right up until she got sick.
Oh, I saw that go by. I'm so sorry. Let's see. There was something. Oh, I know. I wanted to make sure that I read this quote of yours. So you are forthright in coming out and just saying that, quote, household labor inequality is domestic abuse. A man who can watch his wife work herself into illness doesn't care about his wife. Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. So, yes. I'm just, yes. I'm wondering about your husband. What were the questions you had for him, and how did you pick him? And is he like this unicorn, perfect feminist guy, or are there still times that you butt up against his conditioning as a man? Like, how is that?
Wow. Okay. So that's a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot. I just asked you.
So you may have to redirect me. I want to focus on the male conditioning aspect first.
Yeah. Yes.
Because one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, men are socialized into this, and so we have to understand that it's not really their fault, or we have to be gentle with them. Like that. No, that's bullshit. Men are socialized into all kinds of problematic things, and we are socialized into all kinds of problematic things. Racism is socialized. Every, white person in this country is raised with all kinds of racist ideas, and we don't say, well, we're going to let ourselves off the hook because of that. So yeah. I think we need to separate the idea that men learn this from the world around them, from the idea that it is somehow inevitable and unfixable. I think what's really important is, with my friends, what I have observed is there's like 3 ways that men will respond to being called out generally and to hearing talks about household inequality specifically. One is that they can say, oh, like, you're right. Like, I'm sorry, let me do better. Or some variation of that. Or like, I want to do better, tell me more. But that's like the least likely one. More often what you get is they demand even more work. Prove it to me. Go through every chore I'm not doing and explain to me why I should do it. And it's like by the time you've done this, you've wasted 3 days of your life. And so things are worse.
Yes.
And then the third is just like weaponizing anger. So the strategy here with these guys is to make the price of bringing up this issue so high that you don't want to do it. And those are the men who I think cannot be fixed.
Oh, that's so important.
Maybe they will change their mind independently. But if you see that in a husband or boyfriend, like, I don't think that it's worth spending time with. But the men who are like, yeah, I want to fix it, you can work with that.
Totally. Yes.
So like in terms of my husband, so my husband like presents as like very much like a typical, sort of aggressive white American male.
Okay.
He taught jujitsu for years. He routinely talks about how much he loves choking people because that's what you do in jujitsu.
Okay.
Now he is a lawyer and not just a lawyer, but a civil rights litigator, which is like a really intense, aggressive field. So like, he's not a pushover and he's not what these like sexist men would call like a beta cuck. And I think that's important that like you can be like a manly guy and still be a feminist who treats your partner with dignity and respect.
Yes.
So when I met him, he was 70% of the way to how he is now. He definitely identified as a feminist, was definitely generally concerned about issues of social justice, though not terribly informed about, women's issues. And, in a matter of months of just him listening to me, like he was there. And I think that's the thing that really matters is, do you have a partner who's willing to listen to your experiences and then independently educate themselves? Or do you have a partner who's going to tell you don't understand your own experiences and that researchers don't understand what they're saying about your experiences? And I think the latter is much more common with men.
Oh, I'm like taking notes here because this is so important what you're saying. There's a couple things that are coming up for me, which is if you have a guy who's 70% the way there and then you get together, that's only 30% more that you have to go. I mean, let's not say it's going to be perfect. That's 20% or something where you're getting better, right? But then if somebody realizes all of a sudden after having kids, oh my gosh, my husband is only at like 30%.
Yeah.
So I've got 70% to go. That's a different workload to do because then if you're the one that's going to try, if the woman is the more feminist one and trying to pull him, that's a problem. But then also I think another really important piece of that is that you said how willing to individually and independently educate themselves are they that this isn't now a task of yours to now feminize them.
I agree. And I think that early emotional labor is often a harbinger of what's to come.
Yes. Yeah.
Because if he's not willing to like Google what is feminism, what the fuck is he willing to do?
Right.
Like nothing.
Right.
So I started this like advice column on my Facebook page and I started getting questions from young women who are like in the kind of serious dating, considering engagement stage of things. And they all already had problems with their partners and problems that I considered really serious problems. Mm-hmm. And they all prefaced it with, he's a great guy and I love him so much. And it's like, okay, well, that's nice. But people put on their best display early in the relationship. And so however things are early in the relationship, you should assume that that's the best it's ever going to be. It's not going to get better when you're tied to this person, when you quit your job to raise their children, when you're financially dependent on them. These are things that do not improve. I saw this like ridiculous Slate article that just infuriated me a couple of days ago. I think it was to the Karen feeding column. And they've got this dude answering questions. And a woman writes in and she's like, my husband is fundamentally lazy and I'm afraid to have kids with him because I'm afraid he'll like leave our child to roast in the backseat of the car. Yeah. And, like that strikes me as a pretty serious problem.
Yeah. Yes.
And this dude's like, well, once they have kids, everything gets turned on and they become more responsible. And it's like, no, That's not true. It's the exact opposite, because once you have kids, they've got you. You're trapped.
That's so interesting that, I mean, in some ways it's like, well, I can see that fatherly instincts come up, but then I can also see how the dynamic of most of the heteronormative marriages, straight cis marriages, are that the woman does everything. That's just how it's been set up. And so even if you have a guy whose fatherly instincts come on, a lot of times everything gets put on the mom's plate. So I feel like it's not as simple as that. There's so much at play.
Yeah.
So to just say that, like, oh, all of a sudden he becomes a person he's never been, and all of a sudden has the knowledge and education, even though he has a background and possible conditioning from, growing up a man, like it all goes away. Like, I don't think so.
Exactly. And just like, think back on every relationship you've ever had prior to the one you've had now. Did the early problems get better or did they get worse? Like, they don't get better.
Great. Yeah. Great point and great question. I want to read, let me see here. Okay. I want to read this part of this article you wrote for Working Mother. And it's like, I want to read the whole thing because it's so good, but I just want to read a couple gems from it. So, quote, you say, quote, "Men are not innately lazy. Men know that children have to eat to live, that they can't drive themselves to school, and that someone has to buy the holiday presents. He knows clothes have to be washed and that someone has to buy and cook the food. They choose not to undertake these basic tasks because they know someone else will." Okay, that we need to unpack, but the second part that I love too is, quote, "Similarly, our lady genes don't uniquely equip us to understand that leaving newly purchased groceries out is a recipe for food poisoning. Our woman parts don't give us superpowers that enable us to smell dirty diapers. Instead, most heterosexual male partners buy their leisure time and their freedom on the backs of the overworked, exhausted women with whom they live. It's exploitation, plain and simple." Girlfriend, yes. Can we please unpack these things?
Yeah. So everything you ever read on this topic starts from the assumption that this is in some way the woman's responsibility. All of the guides for dealing with household labor are like, here are the lists you should make for your darling husband.
Yes.
All of the books are like, here are the ways you can hire someone to outsource the woman's work. It all just assumes that this is the woman's natural role.
Yeah.
And that's ridiculous.
Yes.
We can argue about gender and genetics, and I'm sure you can imagine like where I come down on that.
Yes.
But the X chromosome doesn't carry like unique knowledge that like you have to eat food, like, or that like children can't be left alone in the yard.
Right.
Men are not innately idiots.
Right.
They're just not. And I think that we need to reframe things and talk about how the way we talk about this issue is incredibly anti-male.
Yes.
It treats men as like these lazy, stupid, incompetent children, but then tells us that we should still be grateful to be with them. And it's like, so this species of human is so dumb that they can't figure out that you have to put like raw meat away. But also, they're so awesome that like you should be willing to do endless extra hours of work every day of your life forever to be with them. Those two things are incompatible.
Totally. Oh my God, it's enraging. Ugh. And it's so offensive to men, that we don't demand better from them. Like, we've so lowered the bar that you think that at some point they would be like, hey, you guys, we're not as stupid as everybody thinks. Like, watch this. We're going to just know when something needs to be cleaned or when the laundry's full or the trash, all of these things.
Yeah.
We're just going to know it. But instead, it seems often that it's like, well, the enjoyment of not having to do those things is so great. I'd rather be thought of as kind of an idiot and not have to do those things. Like, I don't understand why anybody would choose to do that.
I mean, I think the reason for choosing it is really clear. Like, if someone came to you and they told you, you can get 20 extra hours of free time a week and there will be no consequences at all to you, like forever. Does that sound good? You'd be like, yeah, sign me up. And that's what marriage is for men.
Do you think that they aren't
because
realizing, real fast, do you think that they're not realizing that, like, the other part of the deal, the devil's deal there is like, but here's the catch, is it's off the back of the person that you supposedly love the most. So are you still in? Are they just in avoidance of that part of the deal?
I think that these men don't actually love their partners.
Oh, interesting.
I think that's I think that's the thing that people don't want to talk about and that is really difficult for people to face. There is a ton of data showing that marriage, typical heterosexual cis marriage, I should say, is absolutely terrible for women. It shortens their life expectancy. Right. It erodes their quality of health. There was a study that came out in 2010 that found that men are 6 times more likely than women to leave their partners with cancer.
I saw that, yeah.
If you are a woman with cancer, then being a woman is the biggest predictor of your partner abandoning you. And there's tons more data. You know, it causes more heart disease. It shaves years off of life. It destroys careers. Marriage in general is terrible for women, and it's wonderful for men. They make more money, they have more free time, they get free domestic labor, they live longer. There's lots of good reasons for men to invest in marriage. And there's this other sneaky thing of we have this social idea that men don't want to get married. So women have to like earn marriage. So we really like put it all on women of, well, you really got to do everything you can to lure him in, and you really got to do everything you can to keep him. And it's this like almost like worshipful thing of luring someone in who on average is going to not only make your life worse, but make your life shorter. So
how fucked up is this?
All of that is a roundabout way of saying that I don't think you can spend day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, watching your partner exhausted and actually care about them.
So you think it's like, so you're saying that you think that it's like pretty transactional, like the guy, and it's part of like a story and a framework. So the guy continues to do it because it's like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to have the wife and the kids and the job. And so I do that, and they don't ever question themselves like, gosh, is this really fair? Do I really love her? It's like almost like the acting out of love. Like, oh, this is what love, I think, all the pieces that make love, but they aren't actually like looking inside like, do I really love this person?
Exactly. I mean, it's like Brandy, like you and I don't even know each other in person. But if like all of a sudden in the middle of this conversation, I was like, yo, I've got this like really serious thing in my life that like I am really struggling with, you'd be like, well, let's talk about it. Like, let me help you. And like, that's just acquaintances.
Right.
So to have your partner over and over again saying to you and showing to you that this is affecting them, and to often see the physical consequences of it. I mean, we see women who work too hard in the postpartum period who end up with, you know, catastrophic pelvic floor issues, for example.
Yes.
And to just not be like, well, maybe I should like wash a dish, to me suggests something much more sinister than just being socialized to not know.
Yes.
I think the socialization really fundamentally is socialization to not care about women's feelings, to dismiss women's emotions as hysterical and crazy and trivial, to view women's suffering as not real, to view their physical health symptoms as made up. And that's the socialization that enables men to look at their suffering wives and be like, she should probably still clean more.
So I want to ask you about this. Is just this is totally off script of even the question that I had, but I'm just so curious your take on this. One of the themes in my novel that I wanted to explore was this idea of when you aren't the person making the money or the bulk of the money, like how is your value tied to that? And even for the wokest people, that's still a complicated thing. So I want to ask you your take on stay-at-home moms, or women who are working part-time or something where they aren't considered a big breadwinner. How have you seen, and what are your thoughts on how those women basically give over like their rights and privileges because the person who makes the most money is the person that everybody has to cater to? And I find myself having a hard time with this because on one hand, it's like the person who makes the most money or the bulk of the money, like we have to, I don't want to say cater, but we have to work around to make it possible for that person to do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have that money. So I get kind of screwed up in the head about some of that stuff because it seems logistical and practical, but I know there's something fucked up in there. Can you help me?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I think the stay-at-home parenthood thing is really weaponized against women a lot because there are usually layers upon layers of sexism that cause women to end up staying at home with their children. It's the fact that there's, not affordable childcare. It's the motherhood penalty, even though the data shows us that mothers are actually better and more efficient workers. It's the wage gap. It's even earlier socialization where, women are not going into as high earning careers. So there's a sexism component from the outset. But also, like, being a stay-at-home mother is a completely valid choice, and it is incredibly hard work.
The hardest.
And I'm struggling to come up with a job that strikes me immediately as more difficult. So, I think we need to start with like validating stay-at-home mothers as really, really, really hardworking, and also immediately dealing with a lot of sexism because as soon as you stop working, you do become financially dependent on that guy.
And you don't even know. My husband and I were actually having this conversation. We were both, kind of floored by it. But that's something that you don't even know when you make this choice. And when I became a mom, nobody was really talking about it. And I don't know if enough people are talking about it today, but you think, I'm going to stay home with the kids because it makes sense financially right now. And I want my kids, I want to be a part of my kids' lives or whatever the thing is. And nobody's like, except for Suze Orman. Actually, I take that back. Suze Orman, who was on Oprah in like the 90s. I remember watching an episode and her saying, women, when you have kids, you need to have a job. You need to keep your foot into something because then you'll be financially dependent on him. And I thought back then, well, that's sad for your kids. Then you don't get to be around your kids anyway. So then fast forward, when I become a mom, I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that where I don't have a kid so that I can just like go back to work. I have a kid because I want to be with it. That's not the right way to think, by the way. So my mind was not even thinking having somebody sit me down or having a conversation that's like, okay, you can love your kids and want to be with them and be a part of their life. And also, here is some of the sacrifice of that is when you want to get back into the working world, there's a penalty and you will feel it. And also along the way, if you ever feel like you want to leave your partner or you want to have some financial independence, you no longer can have it. So all of those things are super important that I feel like you don't know until you're in it and you're kind of stuck.
There's just layers and layers of stuff. And there's also, you have a baby and then you're going to drop them off at daycare 6 weeks later. Like that's unbearable. I got really lucky, and this is just layers upon layers upon layers of privilege talking, in that I have a full-time job. I like my job. It's also relatively low stress, aside from like the letters from incels.
Sure, yeah. Standard.
They are my biggest fan. And I also work completely from home. So I never had to deal with that, like dropping my child off in an unfamiliar setting and not knowing what was going to happen.
How do you get work done? Do you have somebody who helps?
I have childcare. Yeah, we have an amazing nanny who's actually going to probably be listening to this, Veronica, who is just a saint.
Awesome.
And before her, we had another amazing nanny, Haley, who are just great. And it's, I'm able to know that they're great because I'm home. Yeah. And I'm able to be with my kids. So like, I really wish we could move toward this model. Yeah. Daycare and workplaces where possible, working more from home where possible, because mothers and fathers have a biological drive to be with their children, and their children have a biological need to be with them. And anything that disrupts that is going to cause people to have to give up lots of things that are going to be painful. Yes. So that's kind of an aside, but like going back to the stay-at-home mom thing, I think, it's really hard when someone becomes a stay-at-home mom to be like, leave that asshole. Yeah. So like, I'm not going to tell people to do that, but I think it's important to talk about things from a lens of equity rather than equality, because yes, if your partner works outside of the home, you are going to be doing more of the childcare. And if you're not, like something has gone wrong. But what we need to talk about is the time when they're home, or in the alternative, the time when they should be home. Because during that time, it should be split evenly. That's the equitable solution. Like, yes, you might be doing 40, 50, 60 hours a week of childcare, just as he is doing 40, 50, 60 hours a week of work. The difference is if you're doing 90% of the childcare overall, he has a 60-hour work week where he gets time off, and you have a 168-hour work week that lasts forever and you never get time off.
Yes.
So that's where there's a lot of room where things need to change. With my own parents, when my mom was a stay-at-home mom, my dad would get home around dinner time and he would basically take over, and we'd have like some family time during the week. And then usually he'd take us all day Saturday so that she could sleep because like he knew she was up like breastfeeding my little brother and like dealing with the fact that I was a child who like never slept. So that's to me what an equitable solution looks like. And that, it's going to vary from family to family. But then there's an alternative side of equity. We also need to talk about equity on the male end, where there are absolutely times where the man should be doing significantly more work than the woman, no matter how much he works. That's going to be when the mother is sick.
Yes.
When the mother has just given birth. My husband and I, so I'm pregnant, I'm due this summer. My husband and I were just talking about our postpartum plan for when our child arrives. And it's basically like we get home from the birth center and I get in bed and his work begins because, him doing 3 or 4 weeks of all of the childcare and all the household work is a lot better than me ending up with like catastrophic pelvic floor injuries and chronic pain.
True. Yes.
So I think in a truly equitable relationship, there have to be times when one person does significantly more work. And if that's always the woman, which is the norm in heterosexual relationships, then that's an abusive relationship.
So how is your husband going to make it work with his work, like in order to take time off to do that, to show up for you? What did he have to, or what will he have to set up at his current job to make that possible? Because one of the other components of this that I'm endlessly fascinated with is our capitalistic culture, but like the culture of work and like workaholic men, because what I see is that I know for me, jobs that I have, we all understand that life has to have some flexibility. But like you said, so many of the moms I work with like are efficient and hard workers, and like we get shit done because we know how to work like almost like with a gun to our head, which is like our children, right? But then what I'm noticing is I notice that the men, dads, don't have conversations with their work that's like, listen, my wife is going to have a baby and we have this agreement, and so I'm going to be out for 3 weeks. Instead, it's like maybe they tell their employers, but it's almost like it's taboo to be like, I'm going to show up for my family. And I feel like guys, this is such a generalization, but I haven't met one that hasn't had this, but I feel, and I get it. I also have empathy for it, but I feel like guys are so worried about being fired, even if they're at a job where they're loved and they're not going to be fired, that I feel like they're so scared to really take that time and have the conversation of like, my family comes first in this time. And the pandemic feels like a time where I really saw that happen. We thought, oh, finally, dads are going to say to their employers, hey, I got to split some of this burden of the pandemic with my wife on this because our kids are home. But instead, the conversations after those first couple weeks, they stopped happening.
Totally. So I'll talk to you a little bit about our arrangement and some of the themes that I see and how I see them manifest in a broader context. So we have a huge advantage in that my husband is self-employed.
Got it.
Now, that means that if he doesn't work, he doesn't make money, and there's no health insurance that an employer pays for and no paid time off. So all of those things are really difficult.
Yeah.
And, they put pressure on him to like be back to work as soon as possible. So in some ways they are a counterbalance to the increased freedom. But, he is self-employed, so he can, within reason, decide to take time off. However, he is also a lawyer. So, he has judges who don't want to take that seriously.
I bet.
He's actually in a fight about that right now with a judge who wants him to come in person to a trial in the middle of a pandemic. Of course, a pro-life judge, but, doesn't care about the life of pregnant women and
Of
babies.
Course.
So he's willing to push hard because he understands that the stakes are high. And he understands that whatever stress he deals with in, filing motions to fight with a judge or finding someone to fill in on his cases is going to pay off in the long run because he's going to have a healthy wife who does not resent him.
Yes.
He's going to have a healthy baby. He's going to have a healthy daughter. And these are things that make your life better. And I think that we need to talk more about how that improves men's lives. Having a wife who hates you is not a great way to live.
No, and it's not, that's the thing is all this stuff is not good for anybody, ultimately at the end of the day. And so some of these systems, it just trickles down into everything. And I just think, how would things change if all the dads one day were like, hey, we need to not be working over 40 hours or we're still in a pandemic and kids are home from school. I'm going to take an hour a day that I'm going to give to my family, and I'm going to take it from this. I'm going to take it from work because I'm already working overtime. If they had the ball, I'm on a rant, but if they had the balls to do that, to stand up for that, to me, that's what feminism looks like. That's what being an equitable partner looks like, is breaking the system with us, because I find that so many of us women are the ones doing the work of breaking the system that is hurting us. And it's those are things that the guys could be doing, but they won't because of so many complicated things. But also at some point, they have to stick their neck out. At some point, some generation, whether it's the next generation, is going to have to start having these conversations and not fear being fired.
I think that's it. I think that the solution in every family is going to vary a lot, whether it's, demanding your paid time off, whether it's, fighting with the judge like my husband is doing.
Right.
But ultimately, the standard has to be the work is not all the woman's.
Yes.
And, Jeff, my husband, and I were just talking about this situation with this potential trial and, what he's going to do and how he's going to handle it and all of that. And, what I said is I just don't want to have to be the one to solve this. Just fix it.
Yeah.
And he's like, of course. He's like, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And more women deserve to hear that he's going to find a way to solve it, or at least try to find a way to solve it.
Yes. When men speak up on our behalf, it's worth everything. It just is amazing, because I feel like that's part of the problem is they listen to each other instead of listening to women. And so if some of them become more vocal, that's how things change.
Yeah. My husband obviously is a civil rights attorney, is deeply involved in social justice work. And I'm a lifelong activist. So we're part of this community of local activists. And while things are changing, for most of my life, it has been men of all ages and childless women doing the work, and especially getting elevated for doing the work. Even in the world of social justice, things are not set up for you to bring your child, or for you to have childcare, or for you to not be demeaned for showing up and breastfeeding your child at a seminar. We have this idea that motherhood specifically, not fatherhood, just motherhood, is fundamentally unserious. So we've taken this most important of tasks and we've said, well, if you're doing that, you really probably don't belong anywhere, because, that's weird.
Yes, that's so awful. This is the question I think that led me to having you on the podcast, because I thought, I wonder what Zawn would say about this. Because whenever I post about parenting inequality, the question that everyone asks, we all rage, and then the question everyone asks is, what can we do about it? And it's hard because I don't feel like we should also have to fix this problem. Men should be fixing it, but also, what do we do? And what conversations or action steps do you recommend when women feel like, what do I do about this?
So I think, first of all, it's important to frame the issue correctly. We use all this really passive language that sort of takes men out of the equation, as if this is just a force imposed upon us from above. It's parenting inequality. That's not what it is. In heterosexual cis relationships, it is men offloading their work onto women so that they can have leisure time and sleep. And so I think we need to get really clear that that's what it is, that it's not an accident, that it's quite deliberate, and that, if a dude lives by himself, like presumably at some point he'll make himself food.
Right. Yeah, I think that's how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hear about like an epidemic of like men starving to death or, getting salmonella because they leave out ground beef or whatever.
Right.
So I think it begins with the framing. And I think that we really need to talk about this as a form of abuse. Now, I'm not talking about when there's a minor difference in standards,
Right.
Like that happens. And that's more a product of like personality than, than social issues. But if she's working when he's not, if she's taking care of the kids while he's relaxing, if he's like taking off all weekend to go play golf while she tends to the house, that's abuse, because time is our most valuable resource. Our lives are literally time. Like that's it. And you can't get your time back. So someone who is stealing your time is stealing your life. And I cannot think of anything more abusive than that.
So, okay, aside from poisoning men, then like, are there other options? Like, so then knowing that, once we reframe it and we really look at what's happening, then what do we do that also isn't like hugely, like humiliating, embarrassing in a way to be like, hey, this is abuse. Also, here's how I'm going to help you to fix it for me. Right? Because then that feels fucked up. So it's like, what is the next step after that?
The sad truth is that in a lot of marriages, I don't necessarily think that this problem can be solved. And I don't necessarily think that the woman will be able to leave either. I do hear from a lot of women who have left their husbands over this. And they universally say that their lives are better.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've heard this.
So I think that's a good thing to know for women who are on the fence. But there are tons and tons and tons of reasons that women can't leave.
Yes.
So, I think you do what you can to try to fix it. You give them a chance. And then if you can't, you just have got to find ways to try to make your life better independently of this asshole that you're stuck with. Whether that is taking more time to yourself, whether that's going on strike, whether that's getting more help from family, that's going to vary from relationship to relationship.
Right.
But the critical thing to me begins with framing this as what it is. Because I see in all these mom groups, people like laugh about it. It's like amusing to them. And so that means when women do leave, they don't get support, which sucks. But it also means like our children are listening and your sons are seeing that they can get away with this. And your daughters are seeing that this is what's normal.
Exactly.
So we have to stop framing this as normal. And we have to stop this obsession with marriage and romance with little girls. Because all of the objective information, like if you just look at marriage objectively, we can see that it is miserable for a lot, if not most women. And yet, from the time they're like 18 months old, we started in on this princess shit. We plan weddings and we talk about their boyfriends and we get them all into this romance stuff. We don't do this with little boys. And I think we do it with little girls because this really aggressive conditioning is the only way that we could possibly suspend their critical thinking enough for them to not notice how damaging marriage can be, and for them to be so obsessed with getting married that they will overlook the terrible material conditions that come with a lot of marriages.
Damn, dude.
So I think we have to look to the next generation.
I want to slow clap you there. I want to just like stand by the lockers and slow clap you as you walk down. Shit. Yes.
Yeah. I think we have to look to the next generation, particularly if you're stuck and you can't get out. Like, Like that sucks.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to be the end of like your feminist legacy. You know, you can talk to your daughters, you can talk to your friends, you can disconnect yourself from a bad marriage as much as you can.
Yeah. And I also think there are, I mean, I'm always a proponent of like, I'm never being stuck. Like I always want some out. And I think one of the things is, and even if you're not looking for an out, but is to get in touch with like-minded friends and groups.
Yeah.
So, you know, like people on Zawn's page, people on my page, other friends that you meet when you meet other women who are being honest about things. And that doesn't mean that you're like, well, I guess I'm only friends with like cynical, you know, divorced people or something like that. But it's like a lot of us who are in marriages that we want to stay in also are critically thinking about them and talking about them. And I think that's healthy because if you are somebody who wants to do more of that, then get around people and communities who are doing more of that, because I think that's where you find ideas. Like I know even with friends who are all, you know, in similar experiences, it's like we learn from each other. One of us will be like, hey, so I had this really hard conversation, but it ended up being really great. And here's how it went. And so then that plants a seed in all of us. And so it's like you have to be around the community that you want to push you to be better. And then, you know, and so that, in addition to some of the more practical things about, you know, if you're in a situation where you're stuck, okay, well, what are the elements that are making you stuck? And then are there ways to work toward not being stuck at some point?
Right. I think, you know, also we need to be talking to like high school and college aged women, because that's when this starts. You know, most people who are married meet their partner in their 20s. And, you know, it's like the theme over and over again of like, well, I do quite a bit more housework than he does, but it's only the two of us, so it's not that much housework. And I really love him. Like, you know, we really need to talk about, after like that initial rush wears off and whatever it is you think you like about him is not so exciting anymore, what's left is the partnership. And that's the thing that is going to dictate literally the rest of your life. And if you have a partner who is lazy and you tie yourself to that partner, that is going to define everything that happens in your life forever. And so it doesn't matter how smart he is or how many books he's read or like how feminist he says he is. If he's foisting his work on you before there are even children, it is impossible to have a good life with this person. It's just not possible.
Yes. And I'm hoping that the, you know, parents of all kids will be having conversations about these things, because I'm also thinking there's got to be a fine line between educating our kids and especially our daughters about this, but then also not scaring them or having them have their expectations so high that they're like, I will never find a partner because none of them can actually meet my expectations. So it's like, it's that fine line. And I'm always walking this line of like wanting to be real and tell them what's at stake, but then also knowing that life is about figuring these things out and also making mistakes and then making the next best choice and all of these things. So I can see there being a pitfall of like, I know if I talk to my daughter too much about some of these things, it will be like, well, then there's nobody that will, I can see for kids who lean towards anxiety, I can see them being like, oh my gosh, every choice I make, every person that I'm with, it's like, what does this little thing mean that they said or did? What does this little thing mean? So I feel like for an overthinker, it could be like super overwhelming, but it's still important.
So I do agree with that, but I want to push back on that a little bit, because I think,
yeah, go for it.
You know, never finding a partner is not a tragedy. There are lots of ways to have fulfillment in life, even if you want to have kids. And so I think that I think that's the thing that we really need to get away from, is this idea that like little girls need to find partners.
Yeah, true.
Because when I look at the women I know, they're not getting fulfillment from their partners. They're not getting joy from their marriages, with very, very few exceptions. So like never finding a partner is not a tragedy, any more than like lots of things that you might never do is a tragedy. And I also think that we're not setting their expectations too high, because we're not talking about finding someone who's perfect. And I think that's
yeah, good point.
The like really problematic framing is like, it is the bare minimum that a partner should do an equitable share. That's not shooting for the stars. That's like the threshold at which that person becomes maybe marriageable. And anybody who cannot hit that threshold is not marriageable. We need to frame this the same way that we frame domestic violence. That used to be pretty normal. And now we're like, if he hits you once, you have to leave. And this is the same sort of thing, because this has catastrophic effects on women's health and well-being. It is a form of violence and brutality. And so to ask them to accept a little bit of it so that they can find a partner, we can't do that. We have to get away from that.
Yeah, such a good point. Yeah, thank you for that. That's so true. That's like such an important shift in thinking. Damn, see, I knew I had you on here to teach me shit, Zawn. And I knew it. Thank you.
Well, the other thing is, like, our male children need to be hearing that is an unacceptable partner.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
yes.
They need to hear, like, that makes you undesirable. Because, like, what do teenage boys want? Like, heterosexual teenage boys want to impress girls. And so if all the women in their life react to something they do with that's gross and disgusting and no one will ever want to marry you, maybe we can get rid of that behavior.
Yeah, maybe like shame is really what we're looking for here. Like, if we don't want to have to do the work ourselves to like fix the broken men, maybe we just shame them into being better people. If none of the women want anything to do with them.
I'm a big fan of shame.
Yes, same. The other day, my son, he's in school just 2 days a week, and he was wearing shorts that I think he'd been in for like 5 days or something. And I had this whole, I've given up even trying to get him to wear like actual pants. It's just only shorts. And so that's a hill I'm not dying on. But then the conversation was like, okay, so yeah, shorts, but like they should be clean. And of course, he had like 1,000 pushbacks. But Mom, they're not actually dirty. I'm like, well, you've been sitting in for 4 days. Yeah, but I'm not like doing physical activity anyway. I was like, you know what? Go for it. Like, and then I was thinking to myself, hopefully somebody will smell that, and the shame will do the work that I can't clearly. So I think shame has its place for sure.
Well, this sort of reminds me. This is like so gross. It's so gross, but like it's so worth hearing about. Are you familiar with the movement of men who refuse to wipe their butts?
Oh, God. No. And also, I didn't think I could hate an entire group of people. And now I'm finding out that I can. Okay. Yep. Tell me more.
Okay.
Tell me more.
All right.
I guess.
So apparently this is like a thing on Reddit, kind of like how there's like the no fap, no masturbation guys. There's like the no butt wiping guys, because they think it'll make them gay. And like, that's obviously extreme. Like, I don't think that that's most men. But if you spend any time on Reddit or any advice column or like anywhere, like wait a day and there will be a like, my husband/boyfriend smells terrible question. He doesn't bathe. He doesn't wear clean clothes. He won't take care of himself. Like, this is a common problem among adult men in a way that it would never be a problem with adult women, because adult women spend their whole lives terrified of being gross and filled with shame.
Right.
And I think that like phenomenon is worth mentioning of like, I see a lot of women who say that their like husbands smell bad and who are primarily concerned with like not upsetting their husbands. And I think that's sort of part of the same idea that like we just have to get a guy, and like it doesn't matter if he smells bad and he won't wipe his own butt and he's never made you have an orgasm and he doesn't get you presents for holidays and he doesn't
he's
clean.
homophobic.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, because like you just need a warm body to sit there and make your life worse, and somehow that makes your life better.
and then you need to be grateful for it. Sounds good? Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like a fun life. Shit.
Yeah, so it goes beyond household labor, is what I'm saying, of that we just have such fundamentally low expectations for men and such unbelievably high expectations for women.
Yeah.
When like it should be the reverse, because marriage is great for men. Like, they should be jousting in the streets and like shooting presents at our homes so that they can marry us and like live longer and earn more money and etc. It's so silly that that we as women are conditioned from day one to feel like, well, we just have to get one of them.
You know, as we're talking about all this, I'm thinking, and I wanted to ask you, how are you? How are you with like neighbors and like at dinner parties? I mean, not that they exist in the pandemic, but I'm just thinking that, you know, I'm always the one pointing out these things in my friend groups and stuff when we're having conversations, and I just have to laugh because I'm, you know, it's probably hard to be around me sometimes. And also, here's the other fun part of this is I totally grew up like hanging with the guys more. I always resonated with men more, boys more, and not always, but for like college and as adulthood, I really have a background in putting men on pedestals. So this is all like very new-ish.
Okay,
in the last like 10 years in my family, we just worshipped the masculine and women were flaky and funny, but I was always a black sheep. But anyway, so I still have really close relationships with guy friends. And so it's not like I'm, you know, bringing stuff up all the time, but I also will say what I think about things and with my husband and stuff. So I just feel like you're somebody who could understand what it's like to be that person that everybody's having a conversation and you're like, okay, well, but that's actually like abuse. In that marriage, that's abuse. And everyone's like, God, why do you always have to ruin everything? So have you had experiences where you're in a group of people and you're pointing this stuff out and everybody's like, God, Zawn, why do you got to ruin everything?
I mean, I'm like a delight at parties. I'm always the most popular person in the room. People flock to me because I'm just so lovable.
And this is more for, I mean, this is more for just my own personal interest than necessarily the podcast.
Yeah.
But
well, so I'm kind of the opposite of like, I'm like super feminine, stereotypically like girly girl, and have always been that way. So like, I didn't want to be around boys from early childhood. I mean, I was like going through some of my mom's records from my preschool days, and there are notes from teachers that are like, Zawn literally believes boys are monsters and will run screaming from the room if they talk to her. So this started early. So I've always been just like much more woman aligned. You know, I do have like strong male relationships. Like my dad and I are friends. You know, I'm friends with like a single one of my ex-boyfriends, and I have some male friends, but I've been very careful with them. And I've noticed this like really interesting thing that has happened on social media for me, on my personal Facebook page, not my public Facebook page, where all of my friends, all of them, will get men trolling them and picking fights with them and, you know, sea lioning them and stuff. I don't get that. I don't get it ever. And I think it's because the few times that it happened, I was so aggressive in shutting it down and really focused on like making the man feel embarrassed for like speaking to me the way he did. And that's just kind of my way of like dealing with men. And it could just be that I'm lucky. Like I don't want to say that I have created this for myself, but you know, my husband says that people are scared of me. And I think that among our group of friends, like people know how I will react to things. And what I would like to believe is that they also know that the things that I'm going to negatively react to are things that they shouldn't say.
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes.
You know, I've really tried to make it less about like, oh, I'm going to go crazy on you, and more like, I'm going to make you feel really dumb for saying that thing that just like brought shame to us all.
Right. That made us all, you know, have the most awkward
that just
moment.
Lowered us all.
Yeah.
So
and that's that shame thing. That's that shame thing is like, we have to keep each other in line. And if shame is the only way that it works, so be it.
You know, I think we like good progressives now understand that we cannot tolerate racism when we hear it. And well, to say that we understand that is overly charitable.
Sure.
But at least in theory, you can get people to sign on to that. Yeah. And I think we need to be the same with this like sexism stuff and these like, you know, jokes about like men playing golf all weekend. And, you know, like I think the response needs to be like, John, Jesus, like, aren't you embarrassed by that behavior? Like,
yeah.
My husband's line for like a long time that I don't know if it's good because it kind of like plays on like homophobia, but I do feel like it worked, was always like, do you even like women? Like, why don't you want to be around your wife? I think to whatever extent you can weaponize toxic masculinity is
Yes.
good. To whatever extent you can like make this seem like, well, the not wanting to be around your wife, like that's weird and creepy and pathetic, not the like wanting to hang out with your wife.
Yes. Yeah. Men have to figure out how to have warfare on other men. Like the woke men have to know what, like how to get him by the balls.
And the woke men have to like claim the mantle of masculinity.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
Like it is fundamentally weak to have like your mommy washing your underwear for you and reminding you that you need to shower, and like that's pitiful. That's not a strong person.
No. Oh my goodness, Zawn. So if people want to find you and your work, where would you send them?
So probably the best place to see this work, because like I said, I have a lot of stuff that's not very political, is on my Facebook page. If you just type in Zawn, like my name, Zawn, will pop up and you'll see me. And I post my rants. And my Facebook page is like a really nice place to hang out. Yeah. I really heavily moderate it. And the posters have kind of like gotten to know each other. Like they're friends and they support each other.
I love that.
We have a weekly advice column. So I feel like, it's a good place to go if you're looking for more of this kind of stuff, but it's also a good place to go to just commune with other women and critically to commune with good men, because I have some male followers who I just like adore,
yes,
who really get it. And so I think that's important for women to see too, is like, there are a lot of good guys out there.
Yes, I have a couple male followers that I know by name, like that are just like they're people that I like think about as like, oh, I wonder what so and so will think of this, or I wonder what his take on this is. And it's like even though it's online, it's still real.
Yeah, I have this one follower who's like a lesbian separatist. And every time I post anything about heterosexuality, I'm like, oh man, I wonder what she's going to say. And she's like often calling me out for like not being radical enough, which I just like really appreciate.
Right.
I like it that I have this person who, likes and respects me, but who's also just like, just don't even talk to men.
Yes. Sometimes we need that person who's just so fucking fed up. They're like, let's poison them.
Yeah. I know. I really like the like, let's poison them line. I've started using that in like mom groups.
Yes.
Like someone will post this like problem with her husband and I'll be like, there are a lot of problems poison can solve.
There is a Facebook group out there. I think it's called a group where we all tell you to leave him. And a couple friends have told me about that. Some of them have been divorced, and it just makes me laugh because I'm like, if anybody even goes to a group like that, like, the answer, but you just need the other people to tell you, it's kind of like, am I the asshole, but with like a divorce, with a like, you should probably divorce him slant. It's definitely entertaining. I will tell you that.
I love it. Do you follow Clementine Ford?
Oh, I think I do on one of the things.
She's like an Australian, like a big celebrity Australian feminist.
Okay.
And like her thing is just telling women to leave their husbands. She got shirts printed up that say "Leave your husband." It's so charming and like unapologetic. I just love it.
Yes. Zawn, just thank you. This was just the greatest way for me to spend an afternoon. Thank you also so much for the work that you do, the point of view you bring, for educating me, and for being so unapologetic about all the things that you're helping women to move past. And you always help me learn and grow, and I'm grateful to you, and I look up to your work. So, voices like yours are imperative to getting women out of this overwhelm and illness cycle and actually enjoying their lives, which seems like high expectations, but like you said, that should be just like the base. So thank you so much, Zawn.
Thank you, Brandy.
After listening to this episode, you may need to go to one of those rooms you rent where you can break things with a sledgehammer. I should really partner with one of those let's break shit rooms and give you all a coupon code or something after each episode. Okay, but there was something we talked about on today's show that I wanted to soften around a little. It's the idea that it's never going to get better than it was in the beginning of your relationship or marriage. I think this can be true. Patterns are patterns, and when they're hardwired into someone, it's difficult to rewire them, especially if the person has zero interest in rewiring them. But if you're with someone who is also doing the self-growth work that life gives us plenty of opportunities to do, it could actually get better. Your relationship could get even better as you both grow and mature. So notice the word self-growth work in there, the word self. If both people are growing and shifting as they move through the phases of life and maturing and communicating and being moved by what life is throwing at them, that can be a beautiful thing to do with another person. And I think you can't really know if a person will do that with you until you're in it with them, like in the thick of life, which makes it sometimes feel like playing the lottery with choosing a partner. And maybe it sort of is. A quick plug for my book, which as an indie author, I gotta do. If you're enjoying this podcast, you will likely enjoy my book, Adult Conversation, a Novel. It's a darkly comedic story about a frazzled modern mother and her therapist who go on a Thelma and Louise-style road trip to Vegas, looking for pieces of themselves that motherhood and marriage swallowed up, while they are also tested and tempted to make life-altering choices. Yes, there are strippers, there's weed, it's Vegas. One Amazon reviewer said, "This book has it all. Totally relatable mom content, hilarious LOL moments, parenting pop culture, heartbreaking truths, and the search for the answer to the omnipresent question, who am I? I loved it and highly recommend it." As always, thanks for listening.
Here I am back at the garden.